Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, July 1st, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today is shaping up to be quite warm, with a high of 90.4 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 65.4 degrees overnight. Remember to stay hydrated and seek shade if you're out and about. On Alex's News today, we'll dive into the reasons why a major piece of legislation, a signature bill, is encountering difficulties in the Senate. Following that, we'll explore a critical question: will recent modifications to environmental law help alleviate California's ongoing housing crisis, or will the challenges persist? We'll have details on these stories and more right after this short break. Stay with us on Alex's News. Welcome back, everyone. We begin this morning with a story dominating the headlines from Washington, D.C., where the United States Senate is currently embroiled in a marathon voting session, pushing well into the night. It's all part of a concerted effort by Republican leaders to gather enough support for President Donald Trump's ambitious legislative package, aptly named the, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, quote, or more casually, the, quote, Big Beautiful Budget Bill, quote. Here to break down all the details for us is our Capitol Hill reporter, Ethan. Ethan, this sounds like quite the legislative beast. What exactly is this bill trying to accomplish?
Grace, it really is a monumental piece of legislation. At its core, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is a comprehensive budget reconciliation bill. It encompasses sweeping tax breaks for individuals and corporations, alongside significant spending cuts to offset those reductions. The White House is pushing extremely hard for this to be signed into law by a self-imposed July 4th deadline.
A July 4th deadline? That's just 3 days away, isn't it? What's behind that aggressive timeline?
Exactly, Grace. It is 3 days away, and it's certainly adding to the intensity on Capitol Hill. This aggressive push originated directly from the White House. As AOL has reported, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles informed Republican senators at a closed-door meeting on June 18, 2025, that President Trump fully expects this landmark budget package on his desk by Independence Day. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been actively pushing for a vote on the bill for weeks.
So, this bill is truly a comprehensive package. Can you walk us through some of the key provisions and elements that are causing such a stir?
Absolutely, Grace. The bill is packed with critical components. On the tax front, a primary goal is to make permanent the individual tax cuts enacted in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which are currently set to expire at the end of 2025. This alone is a massive undertaking, as Gemini 2.5 Pro and Wikipedia.org have documented. It also proposes new temporary tax breaks, like exempting tips and some overtime pay from taxes. To offset the estimated $3.8 trillion cost, according to Wikipedia.org, the bill includes proposed cuts to various federal programs. Among the most contentious are deep cuts to Medicaid, which could lead to millions losing health insurance coverage, as reported by AOL and Gemini 2.5 Flash. It also targets food stamps and seeks to repeal parts of the Affordable Care Act, according to Claude Sonnet 4.
That's a lot of significant changes impacting Americans. I also hear there's a big increase to the debt ceiling and provisions for defense spending, along with some significant environmental policy changes.
That's correct, Grace. The legislation proposes a substantial $5 trillion hike in the national debt ceiling, as reported by AOL and the Times of India. It also includes increased defense spending and funding for border security, including for a border wall and increased deportations. On the energy front, it aims to roll back clean energy tax credits established under former President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and promote domestic energy production, according to Claude Sonnet 4. Gemini 2.5 Pro specifically mentions the proposed elimination of the Federal Electric Vehicle, or EV, tax credit and potentially outlawing California's Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV, program. This is definitely slamming the brakes on some green initiatives.
This sounds like quite the legislative labyrinth, Ethan. Where does the bill stand now in the Senate?
It's been quite the journey, Grace. The House of Representatives narrowly passed its version of the bill on May 22, 2025. In the Senate, it cleared a critical procedural hurdle on Saturday, June 29th, with a 51-49 vote to open debate, initiating what's called a, quote, vote-a-rama, quote.
A vote-a-rama? What exactly does that entail?
Think of it like a legislative jamboree, Grace. As the Times of India and Gemini 2.5 Flash explain, a vote-a-rama is a marathon process allowing for numerous amendments to be introduced and voted upon, often lasting through the night. That procedural vote was razor-thin, with all Democratic senators opposing the measure, joined by two Republican senators, Rand Paul of Kentucky and Thom Tillis of North Carolina, according to Gemini 2.5 Pro. And as of today, July 1, 2025, the vote-a-rama continued through the night of June 30th and into July 1st, reflecting the intense debate and negotiations, as reported by Gemini 2.5 Flash. A final vote on the passage of the entire bill package has not yet taken place.
So, still no final vote, and there's clearly a lot of wrangling happening behind the scenes. We've heard about some internal Republican divisions. Who are the holdouts, and what are their concerns?
The divisions are definitely a hurdle, Grace. Senate Majority Leader John Thune can only afford to lose 3 Republican votes. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has been a vocal, quote, deficit hawk, quote, as AOL has described him, and has pledged to vote against the legislation primarily due to the proposed $5 trillion debt ceiling increase. Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina notably voted against the procedural motion due to strong opposition to deep Medicaid cuts, stating they could harm healthcare access in his state, according to Wikipedia.org and Gemini 2.5 Pro. Senator Susan Collins of Maine also expressed unease about Medicaid cuts, particularly concerning rural hospitals, though her amendment to increase funding was defeated, as reported by AOL and Gemini 2.5 Pro.
It sounds like a lot of moving parts. And I understand Elon Musk has weighed in very publicly on this bill. What's his take?
He certainly has, Grace, and it's quite a strong take. According to the Times of India and Gemini 2.5 Pro, Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and X, issued sharp criticism on July 1, 2025, labeling the legislation the, quote, biggest debt increase in history, quote. He took to X, stating, quote, every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame. Quote. He followed that with a stark warning and a vow to campaign against them.
Wow, that's quite a threat. But is his opposition solely based on fiscal responsibility?
It's a good question, Grace. While Musk's stated reasons center on fiscal irresponsibility, evidence suggests his strong opposition is also motivated by the potential negative financial impact of the bill's green energy provisions on his companies, particularly Tesla. Gemini 2.5 Pro reports the legislation proposes eliminating the federal electric vehicle tax credit, which a J.P. Morgan analyst estimated could result in a $1.2 billion headwind for Tesla. The bill also reportedly aims to outlaw California's zero-emission vehicle program, which provides Tesla with valuable regulatory credits. Tesla stock has reportedly experienced declines following Musk's criticisms. President Trump himself has alluded to this potential conflict of interest, according to Gemini 2.5 Pro.
So the plot thickens with that perspective. Finally, Ethan, what's the projected fiscal impact of this bill on the national debt? It sounds like it could be a significant burden.
It could be a very substantial burden, Grace. A Senate version is estimated to add over $3.3 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office, to over $3.9 trillion, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, to the national debt over the next decade, as detailed by Gemini 2.5 Flash. To put that in perspective, at the time of its passage in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was projected to increase the national debt by a substantially smaller amount, about $1.5 trillion over 10 years, according to Gemini 2.5 Pro. The primary driver of this bill's significant projected debt increase is its core objective to extend those individual tax reductions that are set to expire.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this very complex and, frankly, quite taxing story for us. We appreciate you sifting through all those details. That was our first story of two this morning. Our next story takes us to the Golden State, where California just passed what many are calling a monumental shift in its housing landscape. For decades, a law known as CEQA has been at the heart of environmental protection, but also, critics say, a major roadblock to building much-needed homes. Joining us now to break down these sweeping changes is our reporter Chloe. Chloe, thanks for being here. This sounds like a big deal. Can you start by explaining what CEQA is and why it's been such a hot topic in California?
Thanks, Grace. It is indeed a monumental shift. CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, was signed into law by then-Governor Ronald Reagan in 1970. For 54 years, it served as California's primary environmental disclosure law, requiring environmental impact studies for projects, including new housing, as reported by the Pleasanton Weekly. While designed to protect, critics like the building industry identified it as a key culprit for housing shortages due to significant delays and costs.
So it had a dual nature, and I understand it also led to legal battles that slowed things down even further.
That's correct. Studies cited by Holland and Knight found a significant portion of CEQA lawsuits targeted projects aimed at state environmental goals like infill housing. Housing projects were the subject of 60% of all CEQA construction lawsuits in 2018. However, the overall litigation rate for projects with an environmental impact report was quite low, around 1.9%.
Fascinating. So what exactly has changed with the passage of Assembly Bill 130 and Senate Bill 131?
These bills, passed in late June of 2025 as part of a state budget deal, largely remove CEQA requirements for much of urban residential development. Governor Newsom championed them as a, quote, game changer, end quote, and the, quote, most consequential housing reform, end quote, as reported by Pleasanton Weekly. Assemblymember Buffy Wicks stated, quote, saying no to housing in my community will no longer be state-sanctioned, end quote.
That sounds like strong language. What are the key provisions for these housing exemptions?
Well, the main beneficiaries are urban, quote, infill, end quote, developments. Projects must be under 20 acres, require a certain density, precluding single-family homes, and need to be consistent with local zoning. For the, quote, lion's share, end quote, of urban development, like market rate and mixed-income apartment buildings under about 7 stories, CEQA will now be entirely optional with, quote, no strings attached, end quote, as the Pleasanton Weekly detailed.
And were there other sectors that received CEQA exemptions beyond housing?
Yes, the same budget deal included major CEQA exemptions for high-tech manufacturing plants in industrial zones, allowing them to be built with no environmental review, as reported by Palo Alto Online and the Los Angeles Times. Federally qualified health centers, childcare centers, nonprofit food banks, and certain clean water projects and public parks also received exemptions.
Wow, that's quite broad. So, with CEQA off the table for so much development, are we expecting a housing boom in California, or are there still other obstacles to building?
That's the big question, Grace. While developers are optimistic, urban planning experts suggest a, quote, gradual increase, end quote, rather than an overnight, quote, boom, end quote, as the San Francisco Chronicle reported. Other formidable economic and logistical barriers still remain.
Give us the rundown, Chloe. What are some of those remaining hurdles?
The biggest include astronomical construction costs, significantly higher in California than in other states, according to the Davis Vanguard. Labor costs are also exorbitant, with Los Angeles seeing a 6.4% rise since January 2025, as Korea Daily US reported. Then there's sky-high land prices and substantial local government development fees, averaging around $30,000 per unit. Some cities are updating their fees effective today, July 1, 2025. Finally, lingering higher interest rates, and protracted overall approval timelines, which can still stretch over 4 years for an apartment building.
It sounds like we're still quite a distance from solving California's housing crunch, even with these significant legislative reforms. Chloe, I know there's also been considerable controversy around these exemptions. What are the concerns, and are legal challenges expected?
You're right. Over 100 environmental organizations have labeled the bill as one of the, quote, worst anti-environment, end quote, pieces of legislation, raising concerns about potential toxic waste without public scrutiny, according to the Los Angeles Times. The process itself has been criticized as a, quote, backroom deal, end quote. As of today, July 1, 2025, no formal lawsuits have been filed, but a legal battle appears to be a matter of, quote, when, not if, end quote, given the fierce opposition, according to Holland and Knight.
Well, Chloe, it certainly sounds like we'll be keeping a close eye on this, both in terms of new construction and potential legal challenges. Thank you for giving us such a comprehensive and crystal clear picture of this complex issue. We appreciate you digging into this for us.
My pleasure, Grace. Always happy to shed some light.
You certainly did. Here are some other headlines. In international news, a political firestorm is brewing in Thailand. The nation's constitutional court has suspended Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra from office. The decision follows the leak of a phone call between the Prime Minister and former Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, during which Paetongtarn referred to him as uncle and reportedly criticized a regional Thai army commander. The court accepted a petition from senators accusing her of a serious breach of ethical standards. While she has 15 days to respond to the allegations, the move has already fractured her ruling coalition. Deputy Prime Minister Surya Hwanggrongruangkit has been named caretaker prime minister, though in a curious move, Paetongtarn will remain in the cabinet as the new culture minister. The NBA is proving that money talks, and this season it's shouting from the rooftops. The league has set its 2025-26 salary cap at a record-breaking $154.647 million, the maximum 10% increase allowed. It seems the only thing not getting a cap is the spending itself. This financial slam dunk means maximum salaries will soar, with top veterans eligible for contracts worth over $54 million per season. The luxury tax level is now set at nearly $188 million, with 2 new apron levels that will put high-spending teams in a financial penalty box, severely restricting their roster-building moves. With the new numbers official, the free agency frenzy is now truly underway. Tragedy in Gaza, where at least 74 people were killed in a series of Israeli attacks on Monday. Health officials report the day's deadliest incident was an airstrike on the Al-Baqa Cafe in Gaza City, which killed at least 39 people, including women, children, and a journalist. Witnesses say the cafe was a popular spot for civilians to get internet access and was hosting a child's birthday party. In a separate event, Israeli forces reportedly opened fire on Palestinians returning from an aid distribution site, killing at least 11. The Israeli military stated its Air Force attacked over 140 terror targets in the past day and is reviewing the incidents. The death toll in Gaza since the war began has now surpassed 56,500. Meanwhile, tensions have boiled over in the occupied West Bank. Dozens of Israeli settlers stormed a military base north of Ramallah on Sunday, setting fires and vandalizing vehicles. The rampage followed the recent arrest of 5 settlers in connection with an attack on a Palestinian town. The incident drew sharp condemnation from across Israel's political spectrum. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the acts intolerable, while far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, a staunch supporter of settlers, called the attack on Israeli soldiers a red line. And here in the U.S., Californians are feeling pressure at the pump in more ways than one today. A controversial new climate rule, the low-carbon fuel standard, went into effect, aimed at forcing fuel producers to lower emissions. The rule is fueling a fierce debate over its impact on gas prices. Critics warn it could add as much as 65 cents to a gallon, while state officials project a more modest increase of 5 to 9 cents. This comes as the state's separate gas excise tax also increased by about 2 cents today, an annual adjustment for inflation that funds highway maintenance. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.